You use the strength of your legs to maintain your dominant position while you secure the choke. Just a few pounds of pressure on the collar of this gi is enough to reduce the blood flow to the brain to a trickle and end the match. Hold this move for 10 seconds and the fighter will black out. Hold it just a bit longer and he's dead.
The sacrifice throw is a simple lesson in conservation of energy. The stronger the opponent attacks, the further he gets thrown. It works like a catapult, where your opponent's momentum supplies the counterweight. The faster he's going, the further he's going to fly, and the harder he's going to land. Doing the 360 defense requires you keep your body in motion at all times, using your arms to defend different angles of attack. The key is keeping your arms at an oblique angle, with your hands open and straight, so that you don't take any blows straight on. Each is deflected down the angle of your forearm, which reduces its impact. Because you don't have time to cock your arm in a surprise attack, bursting's effectiveness doesn't come from the rotational power of the torso. Instead, it's driven by the legs, which hurl you forward into your opponent. Both the block and the strike land with 300 pounds of force, more than enough to collapse the windpipe or fracture the delicate bones of the face.
During the choke, your opponent is relying on his grip strength and outstretched arms to maintain the choke. The strength of your back and shoulder muscles is greater than the applied force of your opponent's hold, so it doesn't take much to break his grip.
And the closer your hands are to your own neck, the greater the leverage. The key to the double is to hit your opponent below his rib cage, which knocks him off his center of gravity. Wrapping your arms around his legs prevents him from regaining it. Your forward momentum, coupled with the upward thrust of your hips, gets your opponent airborne. Driving him to the mat can yield over 3,000 pounds of injury-producing force. That's like dropping a 20-pound bag of cement off a 9-foot ladder onto someone's chest. The power of this move comes from the spin. Like the wrecking ball at the end of a demolition crane, the power is generated by the rotation of the body. In conjunction with the snap of the knee, the foot achieves a velocity of nearly 30 miles per hour. When the heel connects with the solar plexus, it transfers 1,400 pounds of force, enough to damage internal organs and fracture multiple ribs.
The key to the sprawl is sliding your legs backward, while leaning in and locking your hips at the same time. This forces your opponent's center of mass beyond its stability zone. Coupled with the downward thrust of your forearms, he's now supporting your entire upper body with the back of his neck and head, which leaves him face down on the mat, vulnerable to any number of attacks.
The move gets its power from the pressure exerted by your legs. The first leg imparts pressure to the carotid artery. The second leg, working in conjunction with your arms, optimizes that pressure, transforming you into a human vice grip. If your opponent doesn't tap out, he'll pass out. Much longer and permanent brain damage can ensue.
Like the Hanuman move, the flying knee relies on the explosive power of the legs. But rather than spread the power of our blow over 2 fists, it concentrates it into the spear point of the knee and combines it with the force of gravity. It's the equivalent of hitting our opponent in the chest with a sledgehammer. The goal of this lock is to stretch the tendons at the top of the foot to the breaking point. The strongest tendons have a tensile force threshold of just over 400 pounds. Applying any more pressure than that can tear the tendons from their base or snap them in two. This move uses the same principle as a throw in judo, off-balancing your opponent and then using his momentum to send him down. But it's much more aggressive. The sweep here is actually a strike to one of the most sensitive areas of the body, the Achilles tendon. The secret to the move is wrist control. By rotating your opponent's wrist to the maximum extent of its range of motion, the bones of the wrist lock against the bones of the forearm and make it impossible to bring the strong muscles of the upper arm to bear.
Then, you can pull your opponent off balance and into a potent knee strike. The combined force of the knee strike and your opponent's forward momentum can be as much as 2,000 pounds, enough to dent sheet metal. The power of this move comes from the spin. The rotation of the torso, combined with the foot at the extremity of that rotation, generates speeds of over 20 miles per hour. By the time the heel connects with the solar plexus, it is traveling 60 miles per hour and transfers over 450 pounds of force, enough to break ribs and even damage internal organs.
The key to this synergy of speed and power is punch technique, punch location, and punch frequency. With your elbows tucked in behind your fist, the energy of each punch is maximized. And because the punch is delivered to your opponent's core along the center line, the more directly that force is transmitted to his body. The effect is similar to that of continually slamming a battering ram against a door. No matter how strong, it can only sustain so many blows before it collapses. But the real damage from the knee bar doesn't come from gravity. It comes from leverage. Once the knee is locked, your hips act like a fulcrum, and his leg acts like a lever, multiplying any force you apply. So even though the ligaments and tendons around the knee can sustain 1,700 newtons of force, the knee bar can load a lot more than that, enough to completely destroy the joint.
Kicks, elbows, knees. But these are only 6 of the 8 limbs.
The kick is a fundamental strike in Muay Thai. Like the jab in Western boxing, the kick is the long-range weapon of the sport.
The kick's power comes from the torque generated by the rotation of the hips. It's the same principle that cracks a whip. Turning the hips just a few degrees forces the foot to travel a much greater distance and creates a lot of speed as it does. The longer the leg and quicker the rotation, the faster the kick. And unlike karate, Muay Thai fighters are also taught to strike with the hard bone of the shin. A Muay Thai kick can generate roughly the same force as a baseball bat, enough to crack a rib or a leg.
That same focus and accuracy are at the core of the drill, and are the same principles that underlie the most devastating strike in Muay Thai. Basically, it works like a point of a knife. All the force is magnified by being concentrated in a small, hard area. Even if the elbow doesn't deliver a knockout, it will almost always leave a nasty cut and often end a fight.
With the long-range power angle kick and the fight-stopping elbow strike, we've made a good start at building our Muay Thai arsenal. But there's still a lot to learn.
But the school could teach us another move to add to our arsenal. One that works seamlessly with weapons or without. The knee strike. Getting in close neutralizes the opponent's weapon advantage. Then, in the clinch, we bring the power of the knee to bear. Unlike the kick, which relies on rotation to create power, the knee gets its power from leverage. Pulling our opponent down as we drive the knee up can deliver up to 2.5 tons of force, enough to lift a car. It's not the arms, but the legs that drive our fists. Like a piston, the explosive power of the legs is capable of generating hundreds of pounds of force, all to a very vulnerable area, the soft underside of the opponent's jaw. Like the Hanuman move, the flying knee relies on the explosive power of the legs. But rather than spread the power of our blow over 2 fists, it concentrates it into the spear point of the knee and combines it with the force of gravity. It's the equivalent of hitting our opponent in the chest with a sledgehammer.
Kicks, elbows, knees. But these are only 6 of the 8 limbs.